Hey Colts, it's Mrs. Hladun. It is Sunday, March 22nd, and I hope that you're having a great day. Sundays are usually days for chores and relaxing around our house, and that's what we've done a lot of. Plus, I did some cooking. Made some stewed apples, some artichokes, which is one of my favorite vegetables, some baked potatoes, and I've got some ham going in the oven. So that's what we've been doing today. I hope you've had a fun and productive day too. I'm here to read a little bit more from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. We are going to start pick up where we left off, which is chapter 13. And the last chapters we read found Charlie finding the last of the 5 golden tickets, which was very exciting. And they realized that he had to arrive at the chocolate factory the next day at 10 a.m. to go on his tour, and he could take one person with him. So his grandpa Joe is going to go with him to the chocolate factory. So this chapter is called chapter 13, The Big Day Arrives. The sun was shining brightly on the morning of the big day, but the ground was still white with snow and the air was very cold. Outside the gates of Wonka's factory, enormous crowds of people had gathered to watch the 5 lucky ticket holders going in. The excitement was tremendous. It was just before 10 o'clock. The crowds were pushing and shouting, and policemen with arms linked were trying to hold them back from the gates. Right beside the gates, a small group that was carefully shielded from the crowds by police, stood the 5 famous children together with the grown-ups who had come with them. The tall, bony old figure of Grandpa Joe could be seen standing quietly among them, and beside him, holding tightly onto his hand, was little Charlie Bucket himself. All the children, except for Charlie, had both their mothers and fathers with them, and it was a good thing they had, otherwise the whole party might have gotten out of hand. They were so eager to get going that their parents were having to hold them back by force to prevent them from climbing over the gates. "Be patient," cried the fathers. "Be still, it's not time yet. It's not 10 o'clock. Behind him, Charlie Bucket could hear the shouts of people in the crowds as they pushed and fought to get a glimpse of the famous children. "There's Violet Beauregard," he heard someone shouting. "That's her, all right. I remember her face from the newspapers." "And you know what?" somebody else shouted back. "She's still chewing that dreadful old piece of gum she's had for 3 months. Look at her jaws. She's still working on it." "Who's the big fat boy?" "That's Augustus Gloop." "So it is. Enormous, isn't he?" All right, here's all the kids and their parents waiting. So here's Charlie down here at the end. And there's the other kids with their parents. Fantastic. Who's the kid with the picture of the Lone Ranger stenciled on his windbreaker? That's Mike Teavee. He's the television fiend. He must be crazy. Look at all those crazy pistols he's got hanging all over him. "The one I want to see is Veruca Salt," shouted another voice in the crowd. "She's the girl whose father bought 500,000 candy bars and then made the workers in his peanut factory unwrap every one of them till they found a golden ticket. He gives her anything she wants, absolutely anything. She only has to start screaming for it, and she gets it. Dreadful, isn't it? Shocking, I call it. Which one do you think is her? That one over there on the left, the little girl in the silver mink coat. Which one is Charlie Bucket?" "Charlie Bucket, he must be that skinny little shrimp standing beside the old fellow who looks like a skeleton, right close to us. Just there, see him? Why hasn't he got a coat on in this cold weather? Don't ask me, maybe he can't afford to buy one. Jeepers, he must be freezing." Charlie, standing only a few paces away from the speaker, gave Grandpa Joe's hand a squeeze, and the old man looked down at Charlie and smiled. Somewhere in the distance, a church clock began striking 10. Very slowly, with the loud creaking of rusty hinges, the great iron gates of the factory began to swing open. The crowd became suddenly silent. The children stopped jumping about. All eyes were fixed upon the gates. "There he is!" someone shouted. "That's him!" And so it was. All right, chapter 14, Mr. Willy Wonka. Mr. Wonka was standing all alone just inside the open gates of the factory. And what an extraordinary little man he was. He had a black top hat on his head. He wore a tailcoat made of beautiful plum-colored velvet. His trousers were bottle green. His gloves were pearly gray. And in one hand, he carried a fine gold-topped walking cane. Covering his chin, there was a small, neat, pointed black beard, a goatee, and his eyes were the most marvelously bright. They seemed to be sparkling and twinkling at you all the time. The whole face, in fact, was alight with fun and laughter. And oh, how clever he looked, how quick and sharp and full of life. He kept making quick, jerky little movements with his head, cocking it this way and that, and taking everything in with those bright, twinkling eyes. He was like a squirrel in the quickness of his movements, like a quick, clever old squirrel from the park. Suddenly, he did a funny little skipping dance in the snow, and he spread his arms wide, and he smiled at the 5 children who were clustered near the gates, and he called out, "Welcome, my little friends, welcome to the factory." His voice was high and fluty. "Will you come forward, one at a time, please," he called out, "and bring your parents. Then show me your golden ticket and give me your name. Who's first?" The big fat boy stepped up. "I'm Augustus Gloop," he said. "Augustus!" cried Mr. Wonka, seizing his hand and pumping it up and down with terrific force. "My dear boy, how good to see you! Delighted, charmed, overjoyed to have you with us. And these are your parents? How nice! Come in, come in. That's right. Step through the gates." Mr. Wonka was clearly just excited as everybody else. "My name," said the next child to go forward, "is Veruca Salt. My dear Veruca, how do you do? What a pleasure this is. You do have an interesting name, don't you? I always thought that a verruca was a sort of wart you got on the sole of your foot, but I must be wrong, mustn't I? How pretty you look in that lovely mink coat. I'm so glad you could come. Dear me, this is going to be such an exciting day. I do hope you enjoy it. I'm sure that you will. I know that you will. Your father? Oh, how are you, Mr. Salt and Mrs. Salt? Overjoyed to see you. Yes, the ticket is quite in the order. Please go in." The next 2 children, Violet Beauregard and Mike TV, came forward to have their tickets examined and then to have their arms practically pumped off their shoulders by the energetic Mr. Wonka. And last of all, a small, nervous voice whispered, "Charlie Bucket." Okay, I'm going to show you the picture first. So this is Mr. Wonka, and I think that he's greeting Veruca Salt. I think that that's that mink coat that she's wearing. It's hard to know for sure. Doesn't Mr. Wonka look like he's dancing? It's kind of fun. Okay. Last of all, a small, nervous voice whispered, "Charlie Bucket." "Charlie!" cried Mr. Wonka. "Well, well, well, so there you are. You're the one who found your ticket only yesterday, aren't you?" "Yes, yes, I read all about it in this morning's paper. Just in time, my dear boy. I'm so glad, so happy for you. And this, your grandfather?" "Delighted to meet you, sir. Overjoyed, enraptured, enchanted." "All right, excellent. Is everybody in now? 5 children? Yes, good. Now, will you please follow me? Our tour is about to begin, but do keep together, please. Don't wander off by yourselves. If you should like to, I shouldn't like to lose any of you at this stage of the proceedings. Oh, dear me, no." Charlie glanced back over his shoulder and saw the great iron entrance gate slowly closing behind him. The crowds on the outside were still pushing and shouting. Charlie took a last turn at them. Then, as the gates closed with a clang, all sight of the world outside disappeared. "Here we are," cried Mr. Wonka, trotting along in front of the group. "Through the big red door, please. That's right. It's nice and warm inside. I have to keep it warm inside the factory because of the workers. My workers are used to an extremely hot climate. They can't stand the cold. They'd perish if they went outdoors in this weather. They'd freeze to death." "But who are the workers?" asked Augustus Gloop. "All in good time, my dear boy," said Mr. Wonka, smiling at Augustus. "Be patient. You shall see everything as we go along. Are you all inside? Good. Would you mind closing the door? Thank you." Charlie Bucket found himself standing in a long corridor that stretched away in front of him as far as he could see. The corridor was so wide that a car could have easily been driven along it. The walls were a pale pink. The lighting was soft and pleasant. "Oh, how lovely and warm," whispered Charlie. "I know, and what a marvelous smell," answered Grandpa Joe, taking a long, deep sniff. All the most wonderful smells in the world seemed to be mixed up in the air around them. The smell of roasting coffee and burnt sugar and melting chocolate and mint and violets and crushed hazelnuts and apple blossom and caramel and lemon peel. And far away in the distance, from the heart of the great factory, came a muffled roar of energy, as though some enormous... I'm going to start that paragraph over. I messed that up a little bit. And far away in the distance, from the heart of the great factory, came a muffled roar of energy, as though some monstrous, gigantic machine were spinning its wheels at breakneck speed. Now, this, my dear children, said Mr. Wonka, raising his voice above the noise, this is the main corridor. Will you please hang your coats and hats on those pegs over there and then follow me? That's the way. Good. Everyone ready? Come on then. Here we go. He trotted off rapidly down the corridor with the tails of his plum-colored velvet coat flapping behind him, and the visitors all hurried after him. It was quite a large party of people when you came to think of it. There were 9 grown-ups and 5 children, 14 in all, so you can imagine that there was a good deal of pushing and shoving as they hustled and bustled down the passage, trying to keep up with the swift little figure in front of them. "Come on!" cried Mr. Wonka. "Get a move on, please. We'll never get around today if you dawdle like this." Soon he turned off the main corridor into another slightly narrower passage. Then he turned left, then left again, then right, then left, then right, then right, then left. The place was like a gigantic rabbit warren, with passages leading this way and that way in every direction. "Don't you let go of my hand, Charlie," whispered Grandpa Joe. "Notice how all these passages are sloping downward," called Mr. Wonka. "We are now going underground. All the most important rooms in my factory are deep below the surface." "Why is that?" somebody asked. There wouldn't be nearly enough space for them on top," answered Mr. Wonka. "These rooms we are going to see are enormous. They're larger than football fields. No building in the world would be big enough to house them. But down here, underneath the ground, I've got all the space I want. There's no limit, so long as I hollow it out." Mr. Wonka turned right. He turned left. He turned right again. The passages were sloping steeper and steeper downhill now. Then suddenly Mr. Wonka stopped. In front of him there was a shiny metal door. The party crowded around. On the door, in large letters, it said, "The Chocolate Room." And that's where we're going to stop. The Chocolate Room, that's the chapter title for the next chapter. So we're going to see the first little bit of Mr. Wonka's magic, I think. I'm surprised. I wasn't expecting that the rooms would be underground. Were you expecting that little fact? I think that's interesting. I wonder what else you think is interesting. Do you think that all the children are going to enjoy their trip? Do you think anything crazy might happen to them while they're on their adventure with Mr. Wonka? I'm curious to find out, and we'll find out tomorrow. So until then, I shall see you soon. I hope you have a great day, that you take good care of yourself and your family, and I'll talk to you tomorrow with more from Willy Wonka, Charlie, and the Chocolate Factory. Bye, guys. Have a great day.